Well, welcome back to the Green Hour. This episode is a part of the Concordia Summit series, conversations during Climate Week New York City in 2024. Today, I'm with Erika Gupta, the head of sustainability for Siemens Financial Services Americas. Erika, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm very interested and excited about this conversation, as I told you in the beginning, because I work in the built environment, and we're going to be talking about decarbonization across the built environment, how to do it, and this really cool tool that you have recently unveiled. It was during Climate Week of this year. That's really going to show companies what their footprint is and how they can reduce it to get to these net zero commitments that a lot of people have. But before we get into that, I would like the audience just to get a grasp of first Siemens, the global organization, and then we'll segue that into Siemens Financial Services. But first, could you just tell us a little bit about Siemens, the company, what kind of products they create, and then the global impact.
Absolutely. Siemens is a very large technology company. We have several different business units focused on technologies that span really the industrial and infrastructure sectors. So we have a mobility unit that does passenger trails and is really focused on electrification. We have our digital industries business, which is all types of softwares and automated controls for your industrial sites. We have our smart infrastructure division, which also does a lot of work for grids and in energy and buildings. So we have a large building technology component of this where we really look at managing energy systems around buildings. And we also have a consulting group. We have Healthineers. So we also do a lot in healthcare, doing very efficient MRI machines and other types of healthcare related technology. So very, very broad. And of course, we also have our financing arm, which is where I sit within our financial services division.
So a lot of different technologies, a lot of different industries that you're kind of tackling. We during Climate Week, we were at the Concordia Annual Summit, and Barbara Humpton, she was there and she gave a talk. She's there. I think she was there the previous year when we were there too, and it's always great to hear her talk. I think I saw that she did a panel with Bill Gates at some point during Climate Week, and I was like, "What? This is crazy." But it's interesting to hear about a global company and all of these different solutions that you're creating. And then again, the financial services piece is one aspect of it. So could you talk a little bit through what the financial services arm is, and then what kind of work you do, and then your role specifically as the head of sustainability?
So our financial services group really is focused on that B2B lending. We do also do equity investments, and we have debt financing across a range of just corporate lending directly. We also do project finance, and we do structured finance. And we also have our another group that does leasing and smaller finance mechanisms as well.
So with this B2B lending, I guess I'm curious, and then debt financing, you're providing funding. I'm thinking of from like a sustainability lens. Are you providing funding for companies that are trying to do sustainable projects? Is that kind of how it works?
So we can do direct lending to a corporation that's looking to, say, acquire another business or to do their own sustainability kind of actions within their corporation. But we can also finance projects specifically. So if there's a specific solar installation or, say, a desalination plant, all of that type of work as well.
Well, I think this is really cool. This B2B lending, how you could be financing different projects for companies like a solar field, maybe solar on a rooftop for one of their industrial complexes. It's something that, I'll be honest with you, when I think about the business world, this isn't something I really think about. How companies will go, let's say with Siemens Financial Services, and try to get money to actually do a project. I guess you're opening up a whole new world for me, because I'd never really thought about something like that happening.
Yeah, no, really, it's one of the most important mechanisms in enabling this sustainable transition is the finance to make it happen. And that's really where we want to bring sort of the power of Siemens together of not just bringing the financing, but also bringing the technology and the know-how so we can bring that integrated solution to our customers.
So, staying on this topic of sustainability, what I'm curious about is the financial services arm's role in enabling companies to transition to sustainable operations through financial solutions. That's a lot of words, very jargony, but I mean, as we know, when you go to something like solar, for example, it's going to cost money, or you go to something, whatever it is, to reduce your environmental impact, it's going to cost some amount of money. So I'm just curious about that role that you guys have, and how you kind of go to companies and talk through these things.
So we're really focused on helping them find the solutions that are going to have the most impact for them in terms of ROI. So we want to show that they can adopt specific technologies and solutions that'll actually have a positive impact on their balance sheet. It'll allow them to have a payback in a reasonable time frame and really be better for their business in the long run.
I mean, I just had a conversation. We just released one of the episodes of this series, the third episode of the Summit series, with the chief sustainability officer for JBS, one of the world's largest food companies. And that conversation was really around how in sustainability, the economics behind projects has to make sense for you to scale it and for you to actually make an impact. Because if not, then it's really hard to get people behind it. Especially, I mean, you're talking about large companies. Let's say they have shareholders that they have to please. It's one thing to release an ESG report and show all the good you've done, but it's another thing to look at your bottom line and showing how these sustainable plans that you've done have actually contributed to the bottom line and actually helped. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, is trying to find ROI and trying to show companies that, a solution. I keep going back to solar because it's the top of my head, but a solution like solar, there could be massive ROI on it, and just let us show you what that is.
We also talk a lot about the risk to the business or the cost of doing nothing. So large companies like Siemens are now asking for the carbon footprint of our supply chain because we need to be able to report and reduce our scope 3 emissions, which is scope 1 and 2 for our supply chain, right? So one of the things that now we're seeing is more and more of these large Fortune 500 companies are asking their suppliers, what is your carbon footprint? What are your targets? What's your pathway to reduction? And that's starting to be in the RFPs and being one of the points of competitiveness for these smaller, medium-sized businesses. So really, it's not just about the fact that we can have a positive impact on your bottom line today, but we're also protecting the business and ensuring long-term viability and competitiveness when we help them decarbonize their operations.
On that note, I think that's a really good point to dive into, the bulk of what this conversation will be. And it's around this new tool that Siemens Financial Services unleashed during Climate Week. And this is the Decarbonization Business Optimizer. The gist of it, I would say, is you're providing this platform for small to medium companies, I would say also large companies, to measure their carbon emissions in industrial buildings, in their office buildings, I would say. And this is a platform that it seems very simple. You don't need a lot of data to input, and you can find out information pretty quickly, which is pretty cool. So could you talk a little bit about this new tool that y'all unveiled during Climate Week?
I'm absolutely happy to talk about the tool. As you know, I'm really excited about it, and I'm very, very happy to see it out there in the world where anyone can sign up to use it. And we have made it truly free. So there's no catch here. You can sign up, use it, get access right away. The reason we were able to do that is that we were able to leverage all these amazing data sets and capabilities that have been developed by the US government through the Department of Energy and through EPA and the National Renewable Energy Lab, and bring that together to address this need that we saw. where this came from was really our customers in Siemens Financial Service, customers specifically, coming to us and saying, hey, I'm being asked to provide my carbon footprint in this RFP, or I'm being asked by my customer to provide my carbon footprint, and I don't know how to get it. I don't know where to start. You're Siemens, you're a technology company, you're not just a lender. Can you help me with this? And we said, yes, we can. And we came up with a way to make it really easy to get that information for anyone that is looking for it. And the way the tool really works is to help them, even if they have no data, if they only know their address, what type of building it is, and their size. And even with the size, we've built a capability into the tool where you can go in and measure the footprint of your building to come up with what your area is. Just, add the number of floors and you have your square footage. So what we really, really wanted to do is make it very simple, very easy. And with just that information, we're able to provide an estimate of the carbon footprint for a typical building or facility of that type, of that size, in that location. And the location matters for two reasons. One, the state, for what the energy codes are in that state, is going to affect the performance of the building stock in the state, but also the climate zone. So, some states have more than one climate zone, so we make sure we're not just taking into account your state, but also your climate zone. And what it's pulling from is the Comstock database, which was created by the National Renewable Energy Lab in the case of the commercial buildings. And for the industrial sites, it's pulling from the Department of Energy's Industrial Assessment Center data, which is another really great resource that's available to small and medium-sized businesses, where you can actually get a free assessment of what's potential energy efficiency improvements in your site. You just have to qualify by being a certain size and being in a certain proximity to one of the Industrial Assessment Center hubs, where they can go out and get to your site and help you with that.
This is such a good tool because in my head, I told you in the beginning, I work in the built environment more with on the building materials side of things, product sustainability. We're talking a lot about embodied carbon, which is a little bit different. We're talking about raw material extraction, transport of raw material, and then manufacturing of a product. That's the carbon impact that our customers, our clients are looking for. This is more the operational carbon of the building. And it's interesting because some of the, what I'm guessing is these small to medium sized companies, a lot of them probably don't have sustainability teams like my company might, that's measuring emissions, that's measuring electricity usage, that's measuring all these things. And like you're saying, they get RFPs trying to get, jobs and stuff. And they're completely in the unknown, that they don't know how to answer it. So this is a free tool, and it's like, wow, this is something that these companies have never been able to understand what their emissions are. So this is, to your credit and to Siemens Financial Services, this is a really, really good tool for companies of all sizes.
Yeah, and we've really tried to make it flexible so that whatever information you have, you can add. And the more information you add, the more accurate your result is going to be, of course. So if you know your annual electricity use, if you know your annual fuel use, you can enter that information, and then you'll have a more accurate carbon footprint for your site. We also allow you to upload a load profile. We expect most companies won't have that size, won't have their load profile where they can actually upload what their building uses on an hourly basis throughout the year. But if they did have that, they could enter that as well. What we do instead is pull a synthetic load profile, and we use that for the next step, which is the optimization step.
A lot of my day-to-day job, I'm like looking at ESG reports, looking at my company's ESG report, and then looking at like our clients and seeing how we relate in different areas. Would different companies be able to report on data like this in, let's say, a ESG report? Is this something that let's say I'm a company that's releasing a sustainability report, ESG report? Could I release this information from this tool on that report?
So we are actually providing this to our own suppliers, so that when they fill out our carbon web assessment, where we're getting what is their scope 1 and 2 in our supply chain, we're allowing them to use this as an estimate if they don't have data. Now, for what you're talking about, you really need to have at a minimum what your actual annual use is by fuel type. So how much electricity do you use, how much fuel do you use? If you enter that information into the tool, then the GHG estimates that we're providing are going to be very accurate for your ESG reporting. So what I'm saying is I wouldn't do it with the rough estimate based on where you're located. But if
Right.
you put in your actual annual consumption, then yes, it's very accurate.
Right. Right. I know this is so important too, because I feel like every day I'm seeing another large companies talking about a net zero commitment. This is something that a lot of companies are going to. A lot of companies have made these commitments in line with the Paris Agreement. Some companies have signed on to the climate pledge to be 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. But what I've seen a lot of when I'm looking at like ESG reports or these big targets is I want to know how these companies are going to actually do it. How are they going to reduce, in this case, scope 1 and 2 emissions that directly under your roof, or scope 1 directly under your roof per se. So could you talk a little bit about how this tool not only shows your footprint, but it also can provide you options of how you can reduce those things in your footprint?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when you get into the real specifics of how do you reduce it at your site, I think that's the first percentage isn't so hard. It's the last, 20 to 30%. That's where the real challenge is. And that's where you need to sit down with an engineer and really look at your site and determine how do you do it. So Siemens has been committed to net zero by 2030, and we're already over 50% of the way there without offsetting, which I think is enormous because we have a lot of manufacturing sites. So we know firsthand what it takes to decarbonize, and we know how challenging it is. And that's part of what we really wanted to pull into this optimization step, is to say, okay, for your site, we now know which fuels you use. We know what your heating load is and what your cooling load is, what your electricity usage is. What are the technologies we can adopt based on, how much space you have on your roof? There's a limit to how much solar you can put on in a facility roof. We added an option to the tool to say, I have land area for renewables, and you can put in how much land area you have. And then we'll use that additional space as well to figure out, how do I size my solar installation for the load I have at my building? And we have other technologies in there as well. So we have combined heat and power as a technology you can look at. We have thermal energy storage, both hot and cold. Thermal energy storage as an option to consider for decarbonization. Doesn't automatically consider it, but if you go into custom, you can even choose to look at a wind turbine. Let's say you're in a very large rural area where your manufacturing facility is and you have space. You could even consider that. And what the tool is doing is taking data from the National Renewable Energy Lab's annual technology baseline. So it's updated every year, annual, with what is the latest for technology performance, expectation, and cost on a national average. So it's not Siemens specific technology. It's not Siemens specific cost. It's national average cost and performance. And what we're doing is we're taking the load profile and we're looking at this complex optimization of, how do I size my system to maximize my carbon footprint reduction and minimize my total life cycle costs, right? So like what is my optimal point of each of these technologies? What combination? How much solar compared to how much storage? How much thermal energy storage compared to battery energy storage? What makes sense for my site? Just to give an idea of what is the realm of the possibility? What are the real actions I could consider taking? So at that point, you can see that there is a pathway. And once you have that initial confidence that it's possible, and it's possible with a positive ROI, now you can reach out and do that site-specific analysis, because you still are going to need an energy engineer to take that next step and design what's specific for your site.
So with Siemens offering this tool for free, what I guess I'm wondering is, how does Siemens benefit from this down the road? Is it something where, you offer this for free? It's a great tool. It's going to help a lot of people, a lot of businesses. But is this something where y'all kind of predict that, as you give them these options, these different companies, different businesses options to, reduce their scope 1 and 2 emissions, that they will actually use Siemens Financial Services as kind of like the B2B lending for these projects? I guess I'm trying to think about, maybe I'm on the wrong path, but I'm trying to think about, how Siemens really benefits out of this free tool.
Yeah, so there absolutely is the opportunity for Siemens to help customers with their decarbonization if they choose to contact and work with us. But really, the challenge is so large that no one organization can, in the time frame needed, provide all of the financing and all of the solutions necessary to undertake the transformation that is needed. So really for us, it was about getting the customers started, one, and two, as a lender, when we provide our financing, we're really investing in the business that we are lending to, right? If they're not profitable into the future, they're not going to be able to repay us. So helping them with the tools they need to ensure that they're competitive into the future, that's really important for us. That's important for our business. We benefit when our customers are successful. So we want to give them the tools and capabilities to enable that. And yes, of course, if there's something that Siemens can provide in terms of products or solutions or financing or even consulting, through our consulting arm, there is a capability to reach out to us directly through the tool to ask for that assistance.
I mean, a tool like this, like I said in the beginning, it's so critical when you consider things like the Paris Agreement. You consider things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and a lot of people or a lot of organizations might not have the I don't want to say transparency, but the eyesight on what the emissions are in their facilities. So something like this can really show how they can decarbonize at scale, and it's a free tool. They get on there that they can put in this simple information, and then they can figure out how they can reduce their footprint, and then ultimately get to where they need to be. And as a world, not just as the U.S., but as a world, tools like this are really going to help us get to where we need to be, because without them, then you're kind of blind. An organization's blind if they don't know, the electricity in each of their facility. It's kind of mind-boggling to think about that a lot of companies are probably going blind before a tool like this was even created.
No, that's really true because we just don't have data at the load profile level for most of the buildings that we're operating in the US, right? Like most small and medium-sized enterprises are not going to have sustainability engineers or heads of sustainability, as you just described. And to bring in an energy engineer and do an audit, it could be $30,000. And that's not the place where they want to start. They need to at least be able to interact with the data and see the realm of possibility prior to starting.
And then, I mean, looking at a stat that I wrote down, the building sector contributed an estimated 35% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in 2021. That's a stat from 3 years ago. I don't know what it is today, but that's a pretty substantial amount. So when looking at that, that's over a third of greenhouse gas emissions in this country. So with organizations, if they can look at the buildings and where they're occupying and how they can reduce it, then we can reduce that percentage and really help the total emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in this country, which again it's not something I think people might get confused and think like, oh, this is a tool just for a small to medium sized business, but no, it's actually this tool is going to enable change, a huge amount of change to hit this 35 to reduce this 35%. And that's something else that's really interesting. And again, a tool, we keep going back to it, a tool that's needed. It's something free. It's something that's readily available and something that's easy to use. My question would be, if there's an organization listening right now and they're like, oh, I want to use the tool, where can they find the tool at?
So it's available at DBO, the letters Decarbonization Business Optimizer. So dbo.siemens.com.
Nice. And then another question I have is, I'm curious, and I listened to some past talks and interviews on this, but how this idea of the DBO was actually created. Where did this idea come from? We know it was launched during Climate Week of this year, but where did the brainchild of this idea come from?
So it really came from my CEO for Financial Services Americas, Anthony Cassiano. So he came to me when I was still in Siemens R&D side of the house, our internal think tank, and said, I need something that's easy to use for my customers. I need something that helps them get the carbon footprint with just their address. And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm going to need a little bit more than the address, but we can get pretty close to that. So that was really, really where it came from. Initially, it was him saying, my customers are asking me for this. I want to help them. I want to enable them to be competitive into the future, but it has to be easy to use. It has to be very, very simple and user-friendly. And as I started developing it with him and with the team from SI and Siemens Technology, corporate technology, which, as I said, is our internal R&D arm, we realized that we could actually take it further than just giving them that carbon footprint to help them really with not just where are you, but where could you be? What can you do? What's possible? And that's really where we built out that really powerful optimization step, which I think makes the tool pretty unique because it's not just giving you an estimate. It's also giving you ideas. It's giving you a path.
So you talked about in the beginning, all these data sets that you're using to kind of create these numbers, the estimate on the DBO. Did y'all see before when you were trying to create, or when you were creating this, that you had all these data sets, but they didn't really communicate with each other, and that's kind of an obstacle and something that y'all are trying to solve?
So I worked at the U.S. Department of Energy for 10 years, decade, running R&D programs across the department. So I was well aware of all of the data and amazing capabilities that the department and the National Renewable Energy Lab had created, but I also knew they weren't being utilized. And I had this vision of being able to bring these pieces, these really valuable pieces together, but to create an interface over top that allowed everyone to interact with it. And I think that's really, really what we achieved with this DBO tool, is to bring that data to the business leaders that need it, that want to be able to utilize it in a way that works for them.
We've talked about that this tool is really looking at scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. I would say primarily scope 1. Is that correct? Is what the tool is looking at?
It's scope 1. It does include scope 2. So it also includes the emissions from your electricity used on site. So it actually uses the EPA eGrid database, which gives you regionally specific carbon footprint. So again, your address, it's tying into what is the carbon intensity of the grid in your location. And you can also enter, if you have RECs, if you have a renewable energy credit, you can enter that in when you update it. So it'll show the decrease in your carbon footprint. And one of the requests we've gotten that we're actively working on is to be able to put in a custom carbon rate associated with your electricity. This could be important for customers that are on a power purchase agreement and they still want to be able to model their carbon footprint in the tool and look at other options. So we are continuing to get feedback and create updates and add new features. So that's one of the ones that will be coming out and we are committed to adding. We've also adding the capability to put a vehicle fleet into your footprint. So not just building, but if you have a fleet associated with your business, to be able to add that in and look at the impact of transforming that fleet to electric vehicles. And we have one more really cool feature that we're working on for the future, which is a climate risk and adaptation tool, so that you can say, this is where I'm located. These are the climate risks that I'm exposed to. And here are the adaptation measures that I could take to help minimize my risks. So that's not in what's available right now. It's just all of the decarbonization and carbon footprint that we just talked through, which is still a lot. But we are continuing to build this out and just add more tools and capabilities.
I'll say a couple things that I just wrote down. Climate risk is such an important thing. It's honestly something I've been at my current job for probably like 2 years. Before I got in my current job, it's something that I never really thought about. One of my coworkers actually did a presentation for us. She for our team. She went over her thesis that she had in her master's program, environmental sustainability, and it was on climate risk. She had used data from the NOAA, looking at water levels, and how they increase over time in different areas, and how property value is affected by climate risk in those areas. I think she was doing it on the coastline of the eastern coast. I forget what city and what area, but it kind of opened up my mind, and I'm like, wow, this is again something that's not really talked about enough. And you talk about the financial piece of things. people need to understand the climate risk of where they're living, where their business is located, because when you look at these things, like I mentioned the NOAA, you can look at these different like maps. It'll map out to like 2050, I think.
I will fully admit that I used their tool before purchasing my current home.
I didn't even know about it, to be real with you, until she presented that, and I'm like, yeah, probably when it comes time for me to buy a house or buy something of property, I really need to look at this tool because it's crazy. But that's a long spill. But yeah, I just wanted to say that climate risk is huge, and I'll be curious to see when that feature comes out. I know it's not out yet. And then you talked about the fleet. The question I was going to get to, though, is there talks about adding like a scope 3 element into this as well?
We have not been looking at doing that yet. Right now, we're just really focused on the scope 1 and 2. We do have other tools in Siemens paid for it. I'm sorry, we can't give everything away for free. But we do have other tools in Siemens that can really help with scope 3 calculations, say for your products or for your site. And we also have a Z-Green, which is a place where we're collecting carbon footprint information from other companies on their products, so that when that then goes into the next, it's a component for the next product that's developed, we can pull all those carbon footprints together in order to sum it up.
Yeah, I would say scope 3, again, been in my company for like 2 years, something that I didn't really know about before I came into my company, and it's talked about so much now. But scope 3 is your supply chain. And it's so complicated. Like I think about like a large global company. I mentioned the episode we did previously with JBS. The chief sustainability officer is telling me about 70,000 suppliers that they're working with, and they're trying to get to a net zero goal. And I'm just like, this just it seems so complicated to try to gauge this. They're working with farmers and ranchers all across the world. It's incredibly complex. But it sounds like that other tool, the paid tool that you're talking about, it helps companies to understand their scope 3 and probably also show how they can reduce it. I will say, from what I've seen, and correct me if you've seen differently, I feel like a lot of companies are going to the carbon offsetting for scope 3 just because it's challenging.
Right. I mean, well, for Siemens, what we're really focused on is helping our supply chain decarbonize their scope 1 and 2, because their scope 1 and 2 is our scope 3. So if we want to have impact on our scope 3, one of the biggest things we can do is really engage with our suppliers, give them tools like the DBO, and really help them reduce their emissions, right? Because if we just keep cascading that down, scope 3 ultimately is somebody else's scope 1 and 2, somewhere in that value chain. So if we really focus on that throughout the entire system, we'll be able to bring our scope 3 down.
So I guess last thing here I'll ask, you talked about it a little bit. You talked about the 2 features that are to come. But I would just ask you, I mean, creating a tool like this, I can see the benefit that it's going to create, especially for Siemens too. You talk about the 2030 goal of being net zero. You're halfway there. You're 50% there with no offsets, which to me is incredible, because offsets are a lot of companies are going to offsets. But what do you hope? Let me think how I could ask this question. What do you hope is accomplished, let's say in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, from a tool like the DBO?
What I really want to see is, honestly, more businesses taking action. That's what I want to see. And that's going to be very hard for us to track, because we don't know what people are going to be doing with the information. Maybe we'll put a voluntary survey into there at some point and say, did this help you? Did you take action? But yeah, what we really, really want to do is drive action. And we believe that it's necessary for competitiveness.
Yeah, you can't drive action if you don't know what you're doing internally. And one other piece I would say, I was going to bring this up earlier, because we talk about this again in my day-to-day, is as a company, I think when you talk about decarbonization and getting to net zero, the first thing you have to figure out is under your own roof. If you're a manufacturing company, you have 100 facilities across, let's say, North America. It's like, how can we reduce our impact across these 100 facilities? This is what the DBO is helping with. And then after that, it's like, okay, what else? What are the other emissions that we're looking at? And if they're scope 3, like you're saying, I love how you broke it down, because someone's scope 3 is someone else's scope 1 and 2. It's great. And it comes down to education, educating your suppliers, giving them tools that they can be successful, and ultimately helping yourself, helping your company to get to your own goals by providing tools like this.
Exactly.
Well, Erika, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. It's been a breath of fresh air, because I work in the built environment, and this is something I see RFPs all the time, and a lot of companies have confusion on what to put. And a tool like this is going to help them and help larger companies too figure out how to reduce their scope 3. I feel like when the suppliers look at this tool at scope 1 and 2.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And I really, really appreciate it. It's important to us right now just to get the message out there that this is available, and we hope to see it utilized.